If these lessons on text are your first exposure to the art of sentence building, I can imagine it may seem like a lot. Like with any art, mastery of composing compelling prose involves long-acquired, hard-earned skills. My goal in this section was to cover the skills comprehensively enough that these lessons serve as a useful overview for the serious sentence mavens out there, without overwhelming or intimidating those writers for whom this topic might be new. Each of the elements discussed here is well-trod ground and can be studied in far greater depth than the scope of these lessons allow. No doubt, serious grammarians, linguists, and style experts will see gaps where deeper, more specific information could provide prose writers the greater breadth of knowledge that experts like Barry Tarshis, Steven Pinker, Virginia Tufte, and Brooks Landon have previously provided. This survey is intended merely as a clear, bird's-eye view for the experts and a roadmap for the uninitiated. By way of summing up, we began with the proposition that writing is a process of addition, which begins with a simple base clause. This can be expanded from within by adding modifiers, subordinate clauses or phrases, interrupters, or introductory clauses or phrases. The base clause can also be expanded by adding other clauses or phrases to it in several ways. The writer can add subordinate clauses, which add detail and specificity. The writer can add coordinate clauses with the use of the 7 coordinating conjunctions, and, but, or, for, nor, so, and yet. But the writer should add these clauses judiciously, as the reader's focus can be challenged by a bevy of these connecting clauses. The writer can also add coordinate clauses using a colon or semicolon. However, the clauses must be independent and closely related information. Lastly, the writer can expand the base clause using loose modifying phrases, adding detail with each successive modifier, creating a sense of movement to the sentence depending on the position of the base clause, offering the writer great flexibility in the style of prose they wish to present their reader. These are the options. From these limited options springs the infinite complexity we see in all the literature we know and love. Perhaps the only challenge fiction writers face, that's comparable to the task of creating an interesting story, is the struggle to present that story to the reader with adequately appealing prose. Thinking about reader sensitivity offers the writer a useful heading, a literary polar north, so to speak. Understanding how much your prose is taxing your reader's working memory helps the writer to compose sentences that are easier to process and appreciate. Clear, well-formed prose allows the reader the spare cognitive capital they need to think about, understand, and appreciate the story. A reader who is struggling to comprehend the words at the sentence level is unlikely to stick around long enough to appreciate the story a writer is trying to tell, no matter how great it may be. With all this in mind, writers can apply many of the tools we've discussed in this section to create prose that conveys the story clearly and with artistic intention. Here are a few time-tested ways to ensure your prose isn't overtaxing your reader's cognitive container. 1. Always knowing where you want your reader's focus to be at the start and end of sentences, and then connecting the end of one sentence to the start of the next. Reader sensitivity. 2. Using short subjects instead of long noun phrases or abstract concepts. 3. Keeping your subject and verb close together, avoiding long or multiple subordinating phrases or clauses. 4. Using loose modifiers that aren't misplaced or dangling. That is, making certain the target of the modifier is clear so that the reader doesn't veer off course. 5. Using parallel constructions, especially in lists, so that the reader is using the least amount of cognitive capital possible to process the sentence construction. 6. Sticking to familiar conventional patterns with correlative pronouns or familiar pairs. Either or, neither nor, both and, on the one hand, on the other hand, etc. 7. Using familiar rhythmic patterns like tricolon crescendo and tricolon decrescendo. This can add both a pleasing musical quality to your sentences while helping your reader to anticipate the patterns in your sentences. Except for the first item in this list of suggested conventions, all these items pertain to the self-contained realm of the sentence. We've been discussing sentences almost exclusively in this section because the sentence is the most basic unit of fiction writing. Sentences are the cells of the story's body. They are that fundamental. It would be a tremendous oversight, though, if we didn't take some time to dwell on the importance of how sentences connect to each other. Here's an axiom worth considering as our next item on this list of useful prose conventions. 8. Vary your sentence length. Sentences don't exist in a vacuum. They connect to one another, of course. The very first axiom in our list of helpful prose conventions acknowledges this by cautioning the writer to manage the reader's focus. But it isn't just the reader's focus that must be accounted for between sentences. As we've seen, each sentence creates a rhythm of its own, and this poses an additional challenge and opportunity to the writer to create prose that varies rhythm from sentence to sentence. Managing rhythm between sentences is important in the same way suspense in great stories waxes and wanes, or the color of a singer's voice pulls in the audience with a subtle beauty one minute and blows them away with emotive force the next. Similarly, a great long sentence can be complemented or even improved upon by a single short sentence of just a few words that follows it. Great writers manage rhythm in their prose by varying sentence length. Watch how Pulitzer Prize winner Anthony Doerr manages the rhythm in this paragraph from his masterful short story, The Shell Collector. At 16, burning for the reefs he had discovered in books like The Wonders of the Great Barrier, he left Whitehorse for good and crewed sailboats through the tropics, Sanibel Island, St. Lucia, the Baton Islands, Colombo, Bora Bora, Cairns, Mombasa, Moorea. All this blind. His skin went brown, his hair white. His fingers, his senses, his mind, all of him, obsessed over the geometry of exoskeletons, the sculpture of calcium, the evolutionary rationale for ramps, spines, beads, whorls, folds. Notice how Doerr sandwiches two very short monosyllabic sentences in between two long, elegant, list-focused sentences. This paragraph needs this break for several reasons. First, variance in syntax is necessary to keep the form from becoming too conspicuous. Imagine a book that had only long, 10-item right-branching sentences composed entirely of loose modifiers. How many of those sentences could you read in a row before the form became monotonous? It would be like an orchestra playing the same note over and over for an hour. Ridiculous. Second, these short sentences give the reader a pause, mentally, between the two extensive lists that form this sentence sandwich. Those lists give the paragraph a sense of progression, all the places the character went, one after the other, and then later in the paragraph, this progression is echoed by all the things the character discovers about the shells he obsesses over. The second list mirrors the movement of the first. Sublime stuff to a sentence aficionado. This is a random paragraph I pulled from this story, not the climax or the opening, and it's not to say that any part of a short story is any less important than any other. I only mention this to say that this dude just writes like this, all the time. Every paragraph like a Swiss watch in its intricacy. What happens when you write like that all the time? You move to Boise and win the Pulitzer Prize. No big deal. Bottom line, practice varying your sentence length. The more you do it, the more you'll get a feel for the rhythm of the prose style you like to write. Then you can start blending your sentences to create the kind of effects Doerr does above. And you'll really be able to hear those effects when you practice the 9th axiom in our list of 10. Read every sentence you write aloud. Perhaps the most important piece of writing advice one could ever give or get. Read every sentence you write aloud. It pays to remember that every written word owes its existence to a spoken word. Writing is merely a fossilized conversation, with the writer the orator and the reader the listener. Speak your sentences aloud and let your ear be your guide. Writing is a physical artifact of the spoken word. 10. Build your own damn philosophy of prose. It's not that I can't be bothered to elucidate my own for you, because clearly Ro's got no problem pontificating on the art of written fiction. But I'm not sure mine will do any good for you. You and I are different writers, and each writer needs her own philosophy, and your philosophy may be to leave such things unexplored, unarticulated, and undiscovered. Fair enough. I've always operated better with overarching principles to guide me, though, so I'll share mine for what it's worth. I mentioned at the outset of these lessons that I came to writing late, almost accidentally. In school, I'd never been a good writer. None of my teachers ever noticed my writing talent. It didn't exist when I was a student. The probability that I would even read books following college, much less write books, was fairly low. I had bad English teachers who failed to inspire any love for literature in me, and they sure as hell didn't teach me how to write. But I fell in love with stories once I had the space to explore them on my own, absent the compulsion of term papers, pontificating lecturers, and overwrought symbolic interpretations. I began by teaching myself. I hoped to write the kinds of books I wanted to read, and over the course of several years of dedicated writing, I developed my own philosophy. My goal is to keep the reader's attention locked in. I would like for my prose to seem inevitable, that as soon as the reader starts one of my stories, they fall into step from sentence to sentence, event to event, chapter to chapter, start to finish. They are dancing to the beat I set until the dance is complete, and when it's finished, the reader will remember this dance and remember enjoying it in some sense. Perhaps I'll fail catastrophically in this regard, but as I stated at the very beginning of these lessons, at least I have a target. You may want to set your target elsewhere when it comes to the words on the page. Or perhaps you think this is a nice target for you to shoot for too. A large part of choosing an aesthetic and a prose style should stem from the type of stories you aim to tell and the writer you want to be. Doubtless, your aspirations to write are unique. They'll likely be very different to mine. I'd encourage each writer to shape their style to both the stories they're trying to tell and the audience they hope will engage with their stories. Writers, especially literary writers, are often guilty of focusing on the writing at the expense of considering the readers engaging with their writing on the other end. Each audience will vary, just as the individual readers in that audience will bring their own schematic memories, interpretations, imaginations, and perhaps most importantly, their own skill level as a reader. The average reader just isn't built for Dostoevsky, and that's fine. For as much fuss as I kick up about Melville, he died a literary failure who'd gone nearly broke, much like the master, Henry James, who was so poor that he was bankrolled in the later years of his life by his far more successful friend and admirer, Edith Wharton. Her writing, still much appreciated today, was simply far more accessible than James's later work. I suppose I say all this to say, you choose the dance you want to lead, and it's up to you to gauge whether readers will want to follow. And to hell with anyone ignorant and pompous enough to denigrate your endeavor to write, or your readers who would choose to follow, whomever they may be. A useful philosophy of prose is not the one where Roe foists the Rowian philosophy onto you or anyone else, but the one that hands you the tools presented here so that you may take them back to the stories and writers you most admire, so that you might explore how those texts work. My hope is that you'll discover how the great writing in the aesthetic you wish to work can be emulated, and with careful study and time, surpassed.